The future Alpha's voice rang across the courtyard like a death knell. The goddess has made a mistake. Lysandra, 19 years old and trembling in a borrowed gray dress, felt the golden thread of the mate bond explode inside her chest. The pain dropped her to her knees. Blood trickled from her nose. Around her, 300 wolves watched in silence as their future leader publicly rejected his fated mate because she was nothing more than an Omega who scrubbed floors. That moment would define her, but not in the way they thought. To understand how a girl who died in the frozen waste became a queen who would one day return wreathed in dragonfire, we must go back. Back to the kitchen where she spent 19 years invisible. Back to the night she dared to hope. Back to the moment when the cruelest gift the universe can give you, hope, first took root in her heart. 6 months before everything shattered, Lysandra believed the mate bond would save her. She was wrong. The kitchen of the Winterclaw packhouse was a cathedral of steam and iron, a place where the hierarchy of tooth and claw translated into the language of endless labor. At the top of this sacred order stood Grenna, the head cook, a woman whose hands had fed 3 generations of alphas and whose eyes had witnessed more suffering than any wolf should carry. Her hair was winter cloud gray, pulled back in a severe braid that made her weathered face look carved from ancient stone. At the very bottom stood Lysandra, Omega, orphan, ghost. She moved through the pre-dawn darkness with the practiced silence of someone who had learned that visibility meant vulnerability. Her bare feet made no sound against the cold flagstones. The fire needed stoking. The bread needed kneading. The Alpha family's breakfast required preparation before the first light touched the eastern peaks. These were not requests. They were the invisible architecture that held her entire world together. Lysandra's hands told the story of her life more honestly than any words could. At 19, they already bore the calluses of a woman twice her age, thick as leather from hauling firewood through winter storms. The burn scars on her forearms created a map of every pot she had lifted, every flame she had tended too carelessly in her exhaustion. Her fingers, long and delicate beneath the damage, moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had performed the same task 10,000 times, muscle memory replacing thought. She did not think about the repetition anymore. Thinking led to wanting. Wanting led to pain. Instead, she focused on the rhythm, the scrape of steel wool against cast iron, the whisper of the broom across hearthstones, the gentle thud of her fist against bread dough, working it until it became smooth and elastic under her touch. These sounds were her meditation, her prayer, her only form of control in a life where nothing belonged to her. "You're up early again," Grenna's voice cut through the silence with the precision of a well-honed blade. The older woman stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick woolen shawl, her eyes still puffy with sleep, but sharp with the kind of concern that came from watching too many young wolves break under the weight of servitude. "The bread won't knead itself," Lysandra replied, her voice barely above a whisper. After 19 years of being told that Omegas should be seen and not heard, and preferably not seen either, her voice had become a fragile thing, easy to miss in a crowded room, easy to ignore. Grenna crossed the kitchen with the steady gait of someone whose joints ached but whose spirit remained unbroken. She placed a warm hand on Lysandra's shoulder. The touch was so rare, so unexpected, that Lysandra nearly flinched away from it before catching herself. "Child," Grenna said softly, and there was a world of understanding in that single word. "When did you last sleep through the night?" Lysandra didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was that she didn't remember what a full night's sleep felt like. Sleep was a luxury reserved for wolves with status, with purpose, with futures that extended beyond the next meal that needed cooking or the next floor that needed scrubbing. "I had another dream," Lysandra admitted instead, her hands never stopping their work on the dough. If she stopped moving, stopped working, she might start crying. And crying was dangerous. Crying invited questions. Questions invited attention. And attention, for someone like her, was never kind. "The fire dream?" Lysandra nodded, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. The dreams had started 6 months ago, always identical in their strange intensity. She stood in a field of frozen grass beneath a sky that burned gold. Wings, massive and terrible and beautiful beyond comprehension, blocked out the sun. And a voice, ancient and patient as mountains, whispered words she could never quite remember when she woke gasping in her corner of the kitchen. "Dreams are just stories our minds tell us when we're too tired to lie to ourselves," Grenna said, but her tone was gentle, almost wistful. "They don't mean anything." But Lysandra wondered, because in the dreams she wasn't afraid. In the dreams, the fire that should have consumed her felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed. The older woman studied her for a long moment, and Lysandra could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing against the air between them. Finally, Grenna sighed and moved to stoke the fire herself, sparing Lysandra's raw hands for a few precious moments. "The awakening ceremony is in 6 months," Grenna said quietly. "You'll be 19, old enough for the mate bond to manifest." Lysandra's hands stilled in the dough. This was the forbidden topic, the secret hope that every Omega carried like a candle flame, cupped against the wind. The mate bond, the sacred gift that could elevate even the lowest wolf if the goddess smiled upon them. "Don't," Lysandra whispered. "Don't let me hope for that." "Why not?" Grenna asked. "Every wolf deserves to hope for their mate." "Because I'm not every wolf." Lysandra's voice cracked on the last word. "I'm an Omega. If the bond comes, it will be to another Omega, or maybe a kind beta if I'm lucky. It won't change anything. I'll still be here, in this kitchen, invisible." Grenna was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something she had never done before. She pulled Lysandra into an embrace, flower and all, and held her while the girl she had watched grow up finally allowed herself to shake with the weight of all those years of suppressed hope. "Listen to me," Grenna said fiercely. "The goddess doesn't make mistakes. If the bond comes for you, it will be exactly what you need. Maybe not what you want, but what you need." Lysandra wanted to believe her. Goddess, how she wanted to believe. The Winter Claw pack numbered nearly 300 souls, spread across a valley that nestled between two mountain ranges like a child cradled in protective arms. The pack house, a massive structure of stone and timber that had stood for 2 centuries, dominated the center of the settlement. Around it, like satellites orbiting an indifferent sun, stood the barracks for unmated warriors, the training grounds where young wolves learned to kill, the elders' council chamber where judgment was dispensed without mercy, and the market square where hierarchy determined who ate first and who ate last. And everywhere, invisible but absolute as gravity, the hierarchy ruled. Alphas walked with their heads high, their shoulders back, their every movement radiating the casual confidence of those who had never known powerlessness. They took what they wanted because the world had taught them they deserved to take. Betas moved in their wake, respected for their skills, valued for their loyalty, necessary for keeping the machinery of survival running. They were the spine of the pack, the workers and warriors who made comfort possible for those above them. And then there were the Omegas. Only 12 remained in Winterclaw. Most packs had more, but the northern territories were harsh, and harsh lands bred harsher traditions. Half the Omegas had fled in recent years, escaping to gentler packs where servitude came with basic dignity. Those who remained were servants, laborers, the invisible hands that made comfort possible for everyone else. Lysandra had been 5 years old when her father died. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. She was the only child of a single mother. Lysandra had been 5 years old when her parents died. The details had never been fully explained to her, sanitized by adults who believed children couldn't handle truth. All she knew was that 20 wolves had left on a clear spring morning for a hunting expedition into the disputed borderlands between Winterclaw and the Shadow Ridge Pack. Only 12 returned, carrying stories of an ambush, of betrayal, of blood soaking into new grass. Her parents were not among the survivors. The pack, in a gesture that was considered generous at the time, had allowed her to stay. They could have cast her out, left her to the mercy of rogue wolves or starvation or the elements. Instead, they gave her a purpose built on service. At 5, she learned to scrub pots until her small hands bled. At 7, she learned to mend clothing with stitches so small they were nearly invisible. At 10, she learned to chop wood and haul water, her child's body straining under burdens meant for adults. By 15, she had become so efficient, so invisible that most pack members couldn't remember her name. They called her the Omega Girl, or that one with the brown hair, or most commonly, nothing at all. But Lysandra had a secret, a gift that she had discovered by accident and told no one about. Not even Grenna, who had shown her more kindness than anyone else in her life. She could read emotions through scent. It had started small, almost imperceptible. She would walk past a warrior in the corridor and smell copper and ash sharp in her nostrils. And moments later, he would pick a fight in the training yard, confirming what his scent had already told her. She would pass a mother holding her child in the market square and smell honey and summer rain and know that the woman was content, safe in her moment of peace. Over time, she learned to interpret the invisible language of emotion that wolves carried with them like perfume. Fear smelled like frost and iron. Joy smelled like pine sap heated by sunlight. Grief smelled like wet earth and wood smoke. Rage smelled like burning metal. And beneath it all, threading through every interaction like an undercurrent, was the ever-present scent of dominance and submission, the invisible chains that kept the hierarchy intact. Alpha smelled of ozone and stone. Beta smelled of leather and grain. Omega smelled of water and wheat. Grenna had taught her to recognize the patterns, though the older woman called it something different. Every wolf can scent emotions, Grenna had explained one winter night, when a blizzard kept them both awake and working in the kitchen, the world outside reduced to howling white. But most ignore it. They rely on their eyes, their ears, their assumptions about who people are supposed to be. You, child, you listen to what the body says when the mouth is lying. It was the closest thing to power Lysandra possessed, and she guarded it carefully, instinctively understanding that power in the hands of an Omega was dangerous. It invited questions. Questions invited attention. And attention, for someone like her, was never kind. It was a spotlight that burned. 6 months before the awakening ceremony, on a night when the moon hung full and silver over the valley like a watchful eye, Lysandra's carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. She had been sent to deliver fresh linens to the Alpha's private quarters, a task that required her to navigate the upper floors of the pack house where she rarely ventured. The corridors here were wider, the air warmer from better-maintained fires, the walls decorated with tapestries depicting great hunts and ancient victories. This was a world she observed but did not inhabit, a place where her presence was tolerated only as long as she remained useful and unseen. She was hurrying, her arms full of folded sheets that smelled of lavender and wood smoke, when she heard voices, angry voices, sharp with fury and frustration, coming from behind the heavy oak door of the Alpha's study. Lysandra knew she should keep walking. Eavesdropping was not just forbidden, it was dangerous. Discovery could mean punishment, banishment, or worse. But something in the tone and the sharp crack of words spoken without the usual careful control made her pause despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. You cannot expect me to perpetuate a system that is rotting from the inside. The first voice was young, male, vibrating with barely contained rage that spoke of arguments repeated too many times. You will do as tradition demands. The second voice was older, rougher, carrying the weight of absolute authority that expected obedience without question. Your personal feelings are irrelevant. You are the future Alpha. You will lead as every Alpha before you has led. By crushing anyone who shows weakness, by treating Omegas like they're disposable tools. Father, the Shadow Ridge Pack is mobilizing. They smell our rigidity like blood in the water. We need unity, not cruelty. Unity comes from strength. Strength comes from hierarchy. The moment you start coddling the weak, You invite chaos that will destroy us all. The younger voice laughed, but it was not a sound of joy. It was bitter, sharp as broken glass ground underfoot. And what happens when our strength starves us? Half the Omegas have fled to other territories in the past 2 years alone. Who will cook our food? Who will tend our sick? Who will... We will replace them. There are always Omegas. They breed like rabbits and scatter like seeds. Silence, heavy and terrible and suffocating. Then softer, the younger voice spoke again with the quiet intensity of a vow. You're wrong, Father, and when you're gone, I will prove it. I will build something better. When I am gone, boy, you will learn that sentimentality gets good wolves killed. Remember that when you're standing over graves of your own making. Lysandra fled before she could hear more, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the linens. The voices belonged to the Alpha and his son, Thornwell, the heir to Winterclaw, the future Alpha, the wolf that every unmated female in the pack whispered about with longing and calculation, as if being chosen by him would guarantee safety, status, a future worth living. Lysandra had seen him, of course. Everyone had. He was 24, tall and broad-shouldered in the way of wolves born to lead, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of winter storms. He moved through the pack with the casual grace of someone who had never questioned his place in the world, never doubted that he deserved every privilege his birth had granted him. His presence was magnetic, commanding, inevitable, and now Lysandra knew something no one else did. Beneath the Alpha exterior, beneath the arrogant tilt of his jaw and the dismissive way he looked past Omegas without seeing them as individuals, there was doubt, there was conflict, there was internal war between tradition and conscience. There was perhaps something almost like compassion trying to survive in a heart trained to value strength above all else. The knowledge sat in her chest like a warm coal. Dangerous, tempting, utterly forbidden. She told herself it meant nothing. That in 6 months, when the awakening ceremony arrived and every unmated wolf discovered their fated mate, Thornwell would bond with some beautiful, powerful she-wolf. Someone like Celestia, the daughter of the Frostpine Pack's Alpha, who had been promised to Thornwell since childhood as part of a political alliance meant to strengthen both packs against their enemies. Lysandra told herself that the mate bond was sacred, but it was also practical. The goddess paired wolves in ways that strengthened packs, that created alliances, that made strategic sense. The bond served purposes larger than individual happiness, and there was no sense, no logic, no possible universe in which the future Alpha's fated mate would be an Omega who slept in a kitchen and whose greatest accomplishment was learning to scrub stubborn grease stains from cast iron pots without damaging the metal beneath. She told herself this every day for 6 months, repeating it like a mantra against hope. And every day, despite herself, despite everything she knew about her place in the world, she hoped. The awakening ceremony was the most sacred night in a young wolf's life. It happened only once, on the first full moon after a wolf's 19th birthday, when the dormant mate bond that had slept since birth suddenly ignited. In that single eternal moment, you would feel the pull. You would turn, and across a crowded courtyard or a training field or a forest clearing, you would see them. Your mate, your destiny, your future written in starlight and divine will. The bond was supposed to be perfect, unbreakable, a gift from the goddess herself. For Lysandra, the awakening ceremony arrived on a night when the stars seemed close enough to touch and the air itself thrummed with ancient magic that made the hair on her arms stand on end. Every wolf in the pack who had not yet bonded gathered in the great stone courtyard, a space large enough to hold 300 bodies, ringed by torches that cast dancing shadows against walls that had witnessed this ritual for 2 centuries. Lysandra stood at the very back, as was appropriate for her rank. She wore her only dress, a simple gray wool that Grenna had helped her mend the week before, carefully hiding the worn patches and frayed seams. Her hair, usually hidden beneath a kitchen scarf, hung loose around her shoulders, dark and straight as a waterfall. She felt exposed, visible, terrified. Around her, the unmated wolves fidgeted with excitement and nervousness that made the air electric. The males stood taller, puffing out their chests, hoping to impress potential mates with displays of strength. The females smoothed their hair, adjusted their dresses, practiced their smiles in preparation for the moment that would define their futures. At the front of the gathering, on a raised stone platform, stood the Elder Council. 7 ancient wolves whose combined age exceeded 5 centuries, whose faces were maps of every hard decision they had made. They wore ceremonial robes, deep blue with silver embroidery depicting the phases of the moon. And beside them, in a position of honor, stood Thornwell. He wore the formal leathers of the future Alpha, black and supple, adorned with silver clasps shaped like wolf heads. His dark hair had been combed back, revealing the sharp angles of his face that could have been carved from granite. His expression was carefully neutral, but Lysandra, with her gift for reading scent even at a distance, caught something else beneath the practiced calm. He smelled like storm clouds and burning cedar. Anxiety and anger, tightly controlled, but present nonetheless. Next to him stood Celestia. She was everything Lysandra was not. Tall where Lysandra was small, blonde where Lysandra was dark, confident where Lysandra was invisible. Her dress was silk dyed the deep blue of a twilight sky, and it moved around her like water given form. Her beauty was the kind that made other wolves stop and stare, the kind that poets wrote about and warriors fought for, the kind that seemed ordained by the goddess herself, the kind that made sense beside a future alpha. The head elder, a man so old his fur had gone completely white and his hands trembled with age, raised his arms. Silence fell like a curtain, absolute and expectant. "Children of the moon," he began, his voice surprisingly strong for someone who looked like he might crumble to dust at any moment. "Tonight the goddess speaks. Tonight the bonds that have waited in sleeping silence since your birth will awaken. When you feel the pull, do not resist. Do not question. The mate bond is sacred. It is law. It is destiny written in stars that were old when the world was young." He lowered his hands, and the full moon, perfectly round and impossibly bright, seemed to pulse in the sky above them like a great eye-opening. And then it happened. Lysandra felt it like lightning striking her chest with the force of divine will. A golden thread of pure, searing energy erupted from somewhere deep in her core and shot across the courtyard like an arrow, finding its target with perfect, terrible accuracy. The sensation was overwhelming, devastating, perfect and wrong all at once. Her inner wolf, the quiet creature that had lived small and silent inside her for 19 years, threw back its head and howled with joy so pure it was almost pain. Mate, mate, mate. Her eyes, moving without her permission, without conscious thought, followed the golden thread through the crowd, past the clusters of hopeful females dressed in their finest, past the nervous males trying to look brave, past the beta families who had come to witness their children's bonding, straight to the raised platform, straight to Thornwell. Time stopped. The world narrowed to a single point, his face. And for one perfect, eternal second that would replay in her mind for years to come, Lysandra saw his eyes widen, saw recognition flare in those winter storm irises, saw the golden thread snap into place on his end, connecting them with a bond that was supposed to be unbreakable, eternal, sacred. She saw him feel it, and then she saw his expression change. Recognition gave way to shock. Shock gave way to horror. Horror gave way to something worse, something that made her stomach turn to ice. Disgust, pure, unadulterated disgust that twisted his handsome face into something ugly. His scent shifted so violently that Lysandra could smell it even from 40 feet away, could read it as clearly as words written in fire. The storm clouds turned to ice. The cedar turned to rot. He looked at her the way someone looks at a wound that has festered, at meat that has gone bad, at something that was supposed to be beautiful, but has revealed itself to be broken beyond repair. The golden thread between them, still thrumming with divine energy, seemed to pulse with her terror and his revulsion. Thornwell's jaw clenched. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, curled into fists. And then, slowly, deliberately, with the precision of someone making a public statement, he reached out and pulled Celestia into the curve of his arm. The blonde beauty looked startled, confused. Her sense spiked with uncertainty and something that might have been pity. But Thornwell held her close, a statement, a declaration, a rejection before he had even spoken a word. The head elder frowned, his ancient face troubled, as he sensed something amiss in the sacred ritual. But Thornwell didn't give the old wolf time to intervene. He stepped forward to the edge of the platform, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the courtyard with the force of an alpha command that every wolf present felt in their bones. Silence was not requested, it was demanded. "The goddess," Thornwell announced, his voice ringing, clear and cold as a bell in winter, "has made a mistake." Gasps rippled through the crowd like stones thrown into still water. Whispers began, shock and scandalized. The mate bond was sacred. To call it a mistake was blasphemy, But Thornwell was not finished. He raised one hand and pointed directly at Lysandra. Every eye in the courtyard turned to follow his finger. She felt their gazes like physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, crushing the air from her lungs, making her wish she could disappear into the stone beneath her feet. "I am the future of this pack," Thornwell continued, and his voice had taken on the sharp edge of cruelty honed over generations. "My bloodline is the strength that will lead Winterclaw into the next generation. My children will be warriors. My mate will be worthy of the title Luna." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting everyone understand what was coming. "That female," he said, and the contempt in his voice was like acid poured on raw skin, "is an Omega, a servant. She spends her days scrubbing grease from pots and her nights sleeping in the servants' quarters. Look at her." Lysandra wanted to disappear, wanted the earth to open beneath her feet and swallow her whole. But she was frozen, trapped in the spotlight of his condemnation like an animal in a snare. "She is small," Thornwell said, his lip curling. "She is weak. She has no warrior training, no political connections, no value beyond her ability to follow orders. She is not fit to stand in my shadow, let alone sit beside me as Luna of Winterclaw." Laughter, cruel, mocking laughter from the crowd. Not everyone joined in, but enough did. Enough that Lysandra felt each chuckle like a physical blow, each snicker like a knife between her ribs. Celestia, still in Thornwell's embrace, looked down at Lysandra. And there, in her ice-blue eyes, Lysandra saw something unexpected. Guilt. The blonde female opened her mouth as if to speak, to protest, but Thornwell's hand tightened on her shoulder. A warning. She closed her mouth and looked away, choosing silence over courage. The head elder stepped forward, his ancient face troubled. "Alpha Heir, the mate bond is not—" "The mate bond," Thornwell interrupted, his voice rising to a shout that echoed off the stone walls like thunder, "is clearly defective. This Omega is broken inside. That is why the goddess's magic has attached itself to her. There is nothing for it to hold on to. She is hollow, empty, nothing." Lysandra felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart, something deeper, something that had been holding her together for 19 years, the fragile belief that she had value, that she mattered, that someday someone would see her as human. And then Thornwell spoke the formal words, the ancient rejection rite that no wolf had used in Winterclaw for 3 generations. "I, Thornwell of Winterclaw, heir to the Alpha line, reject this bond. I cast aside the weak. I refuse the flawed. I sever what the goddess has mistakenly tied." The words were power, the words were law. The golden thread between them didn't just snap, it exploded. Lysandra's world turned to fire and agony beyond anything she had imagined possible. The mate bond, which had been trying to forge itself into permanence, was suddenly ripped apart. The sensation was like having her ribs pried open by invisible hands, her heart torn out, still beating, her soul set ablaze while she remained conscious through every second of it. She collapsed. Her knees hit the stone courtyard with a crack that should have hurt but was drowned out by the greater pain consuming her from the inside out. A thin line of blood trickled from her nose. Her vision swam, the world reducing to fragments of light and shadow. Her inner wolf, which had been singing with joy just moments before, let out a broken, keening whimper and retreated into the darkest corner of her mind, hiding from pain too great to endure. Mate sickness. It hit her like a tidal wave, a fever so intense that her skin felt like it was burning even as she shivered uncontrollably. Her body convulsed, shaking beyond her control. Sweat poured from her forehead despite the cold night air. Her teeth chattered so hard she tasted blood. Through the haze of pain, she heard voices as if from very far away. Poor thing. Defective, just like he said. Goddess wouldn't make a mistake unless she was broken. The elder council members approached. They did not kneel to help her. They stood in a circle, looking down at her collapsed form with expressions of cold calculation, already deciding her fate. "The rejection is within his rights," one elder said. "But the sickness," another murmured. "A bad omen," the head elder declared, his voice final as a closing door. "A rejected Omega who cannot withstand the severing is a curse waiting to happen. She must be removed from the pack before her defect spreads like disease." Removed. The word cut through Lysandra's delirium with terrible clarity. She tried to speak, to protest, to beg, but her voice came out as a broken rasp that no one acknowledged. Hands grabbed her arms. Guard wolves, their faces impassive, lifted her from the ground. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. They dragged her, her feet scuffing against the stone, leaving smears of blood from where her knees had split open on impact. The crowd parted to let them through. Lysandra caught glimpses of faces through her swimming vision. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the spectacle but unwilling to intervene. Some watched with grim satisfaction. None stepped forward to help. As she was dragged past the platform, she looked up one last time at Thornwell. He was watching her. His storm gray eyes were locked on her face, and for just a moment, his scent shifted. The rotten ice were still there, but beneath it, buried deep, was something else. Cedar smoke, the scent of guilt. But then Celestia touched his arm with gentle concern, and he turned away. Turned his back on Lysandra as if she had never existed, as if the bond had never been, as if she was already less than a memory. The last thing Lysandra saw before the darkness closed in was Celestia's face, pale and stricken, watching her with eyes that held terrible, useless sympathy. The dead zone earned its name honestly. It was a stretch of frozen wilderness high in the northern peaks, where the temperature never rose above freezing, where the wind howled with voices that sounded almost human, and where nothing grew except ice and death and the bones of those who had been cast out before. It was here that Winterclaw Pack disposed of their problems. Rogue wolves who violated pack law, criminals who could not be executed cleanly, and now, apparently, rejected Omegas who represented bad omens. The guards who dragged Lysandra Torpeiro to the edge of the territory were not needlessly cruel. They simply did their job with the detached efficiency of wolves following orders they didn't question. When they reached the marker stones, ancient cairns that represented the boundary between packlands and wilderness, they stopped. One of the guards, a beta male named Corwin, who Lysandra had served breakfast to countless times without him ever learning her name, looked uncomfortable. His scent was conflicted, duty warring with something that might have been sympathy. Orders are orders, he muttered, more to himself than to Lysandra. The other guard, younger and harder, showed no such hesitation. He stripped the cloak from Lysandra's shoulders without ceremony, leaving her in only the thin gray dress she had worn to the ceremony. The Alpha says to die quietly, Corwin said, his voice low. Don't bring your bad luck back to our borders. They left her there, standing in the snow, and walked back toward the warm lights of the pack house in the distance, leaving her alone with the howling wind. Lysandra stood alone for a long moment, watching them go. The mate sickness still burned through her veins like poison, but the cold was beginning to compete for her attention. Her bare arms were already turning blue. Her feet, clad only in thin leather shoes, had gone numb. She could go back. She could crawl back to the pack, beg for mercy, promise to serve better, to be more invisible, to never dare hope again. But she knew there would be no mercy. She had seen the faces in the crowd. She had smelled their judgment. To them, she was already dead. Going back would only prolong the inevitable. So Lysandra walked forward, into the white, into the cold, into the nothing that awaited those the world had discarded. The snow was knee-deep in places, and each step was a battle against her failing body. The wind screamed at her, tearing at her hair, at her thin dress, at the last fragile threads of her will to survive. Her breath came in ragged clouds that froze on her lips. She walked until her legs gave out. Then she crawled. Her hands, already scarred from years of labor, tore open on the jagged ice. Blood, bright red against pristine white, marked her path. She left a trail that the wind would erase within the hour, as if she had never existed at all. The dreams came back. The fire dreams, but this time they felt less like dreams and more like memories of a future that would never arrive. Wings of gold, a voice calling her name, warmth beyond imagining. Delusions, she thought, her mind's last desperate attempt to provide comfort as her body shut down. She found a shallow depression beneath an overhanging cliff, a place where the wind was slightly less brutal. She curled into a ball, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her core. Her heart, which had been racing from the fever and the exertion, began to slow. Thump, thump, thump. The spaces between beats grew longer. Lysandra closed her eyes. Frost began to coat her eyelashes, turning them white as snow. She thought of Grenna's kind hands. She thought of the kitchen, warm and full of the smell of fresh bread. She thought of Thornwell's face as he rejected her and felt a distant, fading anger. She thought of all the years she had wasted believing she had value, believing the goddess wouldn't forget a girl who had nothing. I'm sorry, she whispered to no one, to everyone, to herself. The wind howled in response, indifferent to her pain. And Lysandra of Winterclaw, Omega, an orphan and ghost, prepared to become one more frozen secret in the dead zone. She closed her eyes. She waited for the dark, but instead of darkness, she felt heat. It started as a distant sensation like standing near a fire in another room. Then it grew stronger, warmer, until the air itself seemed to vibrate with energy that pushed back against the cold. Lysandra forced her eyes open, though her lashes were frozen together, and it took 3 tries, each one weaker than the last. The sky above her was burning, not with flames, with light, golden, radiant, impossible light that turned the falling snow into glittering diamonds. And in the center of that light, descending from the clouds like a god-made manifest, was a creature that should not exist. A dragon. It was massive beyond comprehension. Each scale on its body was the size of a shield, glowing like molten gold, radiating a heat that turned the permafrost beneath it to steam. Its wings, when fully extended, blocked out the sky entirely. Its eyes, ancient and knowing and bright as the sun itself, locked onto Lysandra's broken form. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt the strangest sensation of recognition, as if her dreams had been trying to prepare her for this moment. The dragon landed with a grace that belied its size, its talons sinking into the frozen ground and cracking it like glass. It lowered its massive head, and when it exhaled, the breath was warm enough to thaw the ice in Lysandra's hair. Through the delirium of hypothermia and mate sickness, Lysandra saw those golden eyes study her. Saw intelligence in them far older than any wolf pack. Saw calculation, saw something that might have been recognition mirrored back at her. And then she heard a voice, not in her ears but in her mind, resonating in her bones, deep and resonant and patient as mountains. "You are stronger than they know, little spark." One enormous claw, surprisingly gentle despite its size, reached out and scooped Lysandra from the ground. The dragon pulled her against the furnace heat of its chest, wrapping wings around her like a living fortress. The warmth was overwhelming. After so much cold, it should have hurt. But instead, it felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed. As consciousness finally mercifully faded, Lysandra's last thought was a question. Was this death? Or was this, impossibly, a second chance? The dragon launched into the sky, carrying its precious burden south, toward lands where the moon did not rule, and where fire, not fate, determined a wolf's worth. Behind them in the frozen waste, the only evidence of what had occurred was a pool of melted ice and a few drops of blood, already freezing again in the eternal cold. The Winterclaw pack would never know what they had thrown away. But they would learn. In time, they would all learn. Death was supposed to be a cold, dark room where the soul waited alone. But Lysandra woke to warmth, overwhelming, encompassing warmth that seemed to reach into the frozen core of her being and coax it back to life like spring thawing winter's grip. She became aware of sensations slowly, like a flower unfurling in sunlight, softness beneath her body. Not the rough straw palette she had known for 19 years, but something that felt like clouds made solid. The scent of minerals and heat, clean and sharp, and light, a gentle amber glow that filtered through her closed eyelids. Opening her eyes required more effort than she expected. When she finally managed it, the first thing she saw was a ceiling that looked like the night sky had been carved into stone. Black volcanic glass, polished to a mirror shine, reflected dancing points of light that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. She was in a chamber unlike anything she had ever imagined. The walls pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, like the heartbeat of some enormous living thing. The bed she lay in was massive, draped in silks that shimmered between gold and crimson, covered in what felt like the softest down she had ever touched. For a long moment, Lysandra simply lay still, her mind trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she remembered. The rejection, the frozen waste, the dragon, the dragon. She sat up too quickly and her head swam. Her body protested, every muscle screaming with the echo of cold and trauma. But she was alive. Impossibly, inexplicably alive. The chamber had no windows, but there was a balcony, an opening in the far wall that revealed a sky painted in shades of orange and purple. She could see the silhouettes of strange, jagged peaks in the distance, and between them, floating islands suspended in the air as if gravity had forgotten to claim them. A soft sound made her turn. In the doorway stood a woman unlike any Lysandra had ever seen. She was tall and graceful, with skin that held a faint golden sheen. Her eyes were the color of polished amber, and along her collarbone, barely visible beneath her elegant dress, were scales. Actual scales, iridescent and delicate as butterfly wings. The woman carried a tray. Steam rose from a teapot that smelled of spices Lysandra couldn't name, and beside it sat a plate of fruits that seemed to glow from within. Lysandra scrambled backward on the bed, her heart racing. Every instinct screamed that she should be on her feet, ready to serve, apologizing for her presumption in occupying such a fine room. But the woman did something that stopped Lysandra's breath in her throat. She bowed, not a mocking curtsy or a dismissive nod, A full, respectful bow, her head lowered, her posture conveying genuine deference. "Forgive the intrusion, little spark," the woman said, her voice like wind chimes. "The king has forbidden any to disturb your peace, but you have slept for 3 days. You need sustenance." She crossed the room and placed the tray on a low table carved from a single piece of ruby-red stone. When Lysandra tried to get out of bed, tried to kneel, tried to assume the posture of service that had been beaten into her since childhood, the woman gently pressed her back against the pillows. "Rest," she said firmly but kindly. "You are not a servant here. You are a guest of the Dragon King." The woman left before Lysandra could formulate a response, closing the door with a soft click. Lysandra sat alone, staring at the tray of food, her mind reeling. A guest. The Dragon King. Nothing made sense. She didn't touch the food for another hour, convinced it was a test, that someone would burst in and punish her. But hunger eventually overruled fear. The tea warmed her from the inside, soothing aches she hadn't known were there. The fruit was sweet and tart and seemed to melt on her tongue. And for the first time in 3 days, Lysandra allowed herself to cry. Not from pain or grief, but from the overwhelming strangeness of being treated like she mattered. That evening, as the strange golden light outside faded to deep purple, the door to her chamber opened again. This time, the figure that entered made Lysandra's breath catch. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway. His hair was the color of dark gold, falling in waves to his shoulders. His eyes, bright and ancient and knowing, were the same molten gold she had seen in the dragon's gaze. He wore clothes of deep crimson and black, simple but clearly made of materials that spoke of wealth beyond measure. And when he moved, there was a grace to him that reminded Lysandra of predators, of creatures that had never known fear. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he crossed to the balcony and stood there, his back to her, looking out at the twilight sky. His scent reached her, and Lysandra's gift kicked in automatically. Ozone and ancient spice, smoke and sun-warmed stone. And beneath it all, something she hadn't expected. Grief. Old grief, buried deep but never healed. "You're awake," he said finally, his voice resonating like distant thunder. "Good. I was beginning to worry you would sleep forever." Lysandra found her voice, though it came out small. Were you the dragon?" He turned to face her, and a slight smile touched his lips. "I am Veilstrom, king of the southern dragon territories. And yes, I was the dragon who found you dying in the ice." "William," the question burst from her. "Why did you save me?" Veilstrom moved to the chair near her bed and sat. He studied her for a long moment. "I was flying the northern currents when I sensed something that should not have been there. Dragons do not see the world the way wolves do. We do not see rank or bloodline. We see the intensity of the soul's flame." He leaned forward. "And you, little wolf, had a spark so stubborn, so determined to survive despite the absolute cold trying to claim you, that I could see it from half a mile in the sky. Most would have given up. Most would have let the ice take them. But you kept crawling." Lysandra's throat tightened. "I didn't know what else to do." "Exactly," Veilstrom said softly. "You didn't know how to give up. That is a strength most alphas will never possess." Hearing her name spoken with respect brought fresh tears to her eyes. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "There must be something." Veilstrom's expression shifted, becoming almost sad. "In the lands I rule, we do not measure worth by what someone can do for us. We measure it by who they are. And I want nothing from you except for you to realize that the wolves who threw you away were wrong. You were never defective. You were simply too large for their small world." He stood, moving toward the door. "Rest, heal, and when you are ready, I will show you what freedom looks like." He left, and Lysandra sat in the amber-lit chamber, feeling something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The next 3 months passed in a blur of slow healing and careful discovery. Each day, Lysandra grew stronger. The mate sickness gradually released its grip. The pain in her chest dulled from a scream to a whisper, and each evening, Veilstrom came to her chamber. He never demanded conversation. Sometimes he simply sat, watching the sunset. Sometimes he brought books and told her the stories they contained. Slowly, carefully, Lysandra began to talk. She told him about Grenna in the kitchen. She told him about the mate bond and how she had believed it would save her. She told him about Thornwell's disgust. And Veilstrom listened with the patient attention of someone who understood what it meant to carry wounds that time couldn't heal. One evening, Lysandra asked the question burning in her mind. "Why haven't you bonded? You're a king. Surely." Veilstrom was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with grief. "I had a mate. Her name was Emberly. 500 years ago, our realm was invaded. She was guarding a clutch of eggs when they came. She fought them, held them off long enough for reinforcements to arrive, but the cost, his voice broke. I found her body in the ashes. The bond snapped just as violently as yours did. I survived, but I was cursed, sterile, unable to sire heirs. The council says the magic punished me for failing to protect her. Lysandra felt tears streaming down her face. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. It wasn't your weakness, she said fiercely. It was her strength. She chose to protect those children. You didn't fail her. Veilstrom looked at their joined hands, and something in his expression softened. Perhaps we are both just learning that sometimes the worst pain comes from the deepest love. In that moment, Lysandra felt something change between them. Not the violent snap of a fated bond, but something quieter, something growing from shared understanding. Something like the beginning of healing. 3 months after her arrival, Veilstrom took Lysandra to the high balconies. The journey through the palace was overwhelming. Corridors carved from living rock. Great halls where dragons moved with lethal grace. Libraries holding millennia of knowledge. Training grounds where young dragons practiced combat. And everywhere the heat, constant, comforting. When they reached the highest balcony, Lysandra gasped. The view was impossible. Floating islands suspended in the sky. Waterfalls flowing upward. Valleys where grass turned from green to gold to crimson. Mountains of crystal throwing rainbows across the realm. This, Veilstrom said, is what the world looks like when it's built on freedom instead of hierarchy. Lysandra stepped to the edge. She had been given new clothes, soft leathers dyed blue and embroidered with silver. She looked different now, healthier, stronger. In Winterclaw, your worth was determined by your rank, Veilstrom continued. Here we believe love is a choice, that bonds are promises made freely between equals. That strength comes from choosing every day to be better. Lysandra felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening. The wolves wanted a soldier who followed orders, Veilstrom said softly. They didn't know how to handle a woman who could survive the end of her own world. You were never weak, Lysandra. You were too strong for a world that valued obedience over resilience. For the first time since the rejection, Lysandra felt the spark of something other than pain in her chest. It wasn't silver light, it was deeper, hotter, like embers waking to flame. Teach me, she said. Teach me how to be more than what they said I was. Veilstrom smiled. It would be my honor. 6 months after her arrival, Veilstrom summoned her to the Great Hall. It was vast, ceilings soaring hundreds of feet overhead. At the far end sat Veilstrom on his throne. Around him stood the Dragon Council, 7 ancient beings radiating power. And standing apart, arms crossed, was a female dragon, Pyralis, Veilstrom's sister. Where he was controlled power, she was fire barely contained. Her scales were deep crimson. Her eyes held open challenge. The council has concerns, Veilstrom said formally. They require assurance that you are worthy of the protection I have offered. An ancient male stepped forward. You will face the trials of fire. 3 tests. Fail any, you will be returned to the Wolflands. Succeed, you will be acknowledged as a member of this realm. Lysandra felt her heart hammering. She looked at Veilstrom, but his face was neutral. This was her choice. She thought of Winterclaw, of the cold kitchen floor, of Thornwell's sneer, of ice cutting into her hands. And she thought of the past 6 months, of evenings with Veilstrom, of the library, of training, of being seen. I accept, Lysandra said. Pyralis smiled, all teeth. Let's see what the little wolf is made of. The first trial was the firewalk. They led her to a chamber deep beneath the palace where heat was so intense the air shimmered. Running down the center was a path of molten lava. Walk across, Pyralis instructed. Reach the other side, you pass. Lysandra stared at the river of fire. Impossible. But something in her gut whispered this was not about the physical act. She closed her eyes and reached inside herself to where the mate bond had been. The wound was still there, but beneath it, buried deep, was something else. Heat. Not cold silver wolf magic. This was different. Older. Hotter. The fire dreams had been trying to tell her. Lysandra opened her eyes and stepped onto the lava. She should have screamed, but instead the fire recognized something in her. It rose to meet her feet, cradling rather than consuming. The scar where the mate bond had been began to glow orange. By the time she reached the other side, Lysandra's eyes had changed. The brown burned away, replaced by brilliant amber. Pyralis stared, shocked. She has fire magic, a wolf with dragon fire. The second trial came a month later, the skydive. They brought her to the highest floating island. The wind was fierce here. Jump, Paralis instructed. Trust we will catch you. Lysandra looked over the edge. The drop was thousands of feet. She thought of trust, of faith, of all the times she had been betrayed. And she thought of Veilstrom, sitting with her evening after evening. Lysandra stepped off the edge. The fall was terrifying. Wind screamed. The ground rushed up. And then something massive caught her. Paralis, in full dragon form, held Lysandra gently. The dragoness's eyes studied her with approval. Then Paralis deposited her safely and shifted back. You trusted. Most cannot. She gripped Lysandra's shoulder. Welcome, little spark. You're braver than you know. The third trial was the one Lysandra feared most. The trial of heart's truth. They led her to a chamber lined with mirrors, enchanted to show what the soul most desired, most feared. Face your heart's truth, Veilstrom said softly. See what you most want, then choose whether to accept or reject it. He left her alone. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the mirrors shimmered. The image that formed made her heart stop. Thornwell, not the cruel alpha who rejected her. This was different. He knelt before her, tears in his eyes, hands outstretched. I was wrong, the image said, voice broken with regret. You were never defective. I was. Come back. Be my Luna. Let me prove I see you now. The image reached for her. Lysandra felt her breath catch. This was what she had wanted. Validation. Proof she had been worthy. But as she stared at the kneeling figure, she felt something unexpected. Nothing. No longing, no desire, no need for his approval. She had spent 19 years believing the mate bond would define her worth. But standing here, she realized the lie. You're not real, she said to the image. And even if you were, I don't want you. The image looked shocked. But the bond was a chain, Lysandra interrupted. A shackle that told me my value depended on someone else's recognition. But I am not defective because you couldn't see my worth. You are simply blind. She stepped closer. I don't need your apology. I don't need your validation. I don't need anything from you. Because I finally understand what I should have known all along. She placed her hand on the mirror. I am enough, all by myself. I was always enough. The image shattered. When Veilstrom entered, he found Lysandra standing in the center, tears streaming down her face but smiling. I passed? Veilstrom crossed the room and pulled her into an embrace. You more than passed. You chose yourself. That is the rarest kind of strength. 6 months later, on the night of the winter solstice, Veilstrom asked Lysandra to walk with him. They went to the highest balcony. The sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds. I have a question, Veilstrom said, voice nervous. And you are free to say no. Lysandra's heart raced. In my culture, we do not believe in fated mates. We believe in chosen bonds, in the daily decision to love someone, not because magic demands it, but because our hearts desire it. He took both her hands. Lysandra, in the 18 months since I found you dying in the ice, you have become the most important thing in my world. Not because of prophecy, but because of who you are. He knelt. Be my queen, not as a subject, but as my equal. Rule beside me not because fate demands it, but because we choose each other. Lysandra felt tears streaming down her face. Yes, I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the violent snap of the mate bond. It was softer, warmer, like coming home, but choosing love did not mean the path would be easy. The coronation ritual required a price. For 3 days and 3 nights, she lay in the heart of the palace, in a chamber where dragon fire burned eternal. The magic poured into her, seeking out the jagged wound where the mate bond had been torn away. But instead of healing it, the dragon fire consumed it. The pain was beyond description. Every nerve screamed. Her wolf fought the change. To transform meant to lose part of what she had always been. And through it all, Veilstrom stayed beside her. He held her hand even when her grip was strong enough to break bones. He whispered encouragement when she screamed. And when the pain was worst, when she begged him to make it stop, she saw something she had never seen. The Dragon King was crying. I'm so sorry, he said, voice breaking. But you will survive this, Lysandra. You will rise from this fire stronger than you ever imagined. On the third day, as dawn broke, the transformation completed. Lysandra opened her eyes and they blazed with orange fire. Her skin held a faint golden sheen, and when she stood, she understood. She was no longer just wolf, no longer just human. She was something the world had not seen in a millennium. She was the bridge between earth and sky, The coronation ceremony was not golden crowns. It was light and heat and the gathering of every dragon in the southern realm. They stood in the great hall, hundreds of them. When Veilstrom led Lysandra to the center, their collective breath made the air shimmer. "I choose her," Veilstrom announced. "Not because fate demands it, but because my heart does. I choose her strength. I choose her spirit. I choose the woman who refused to break even when the world did its worst." He turned to Lysandra. "Will you choose me? Will you choose this life, this realm, this future we could build together?" Lysandra thought of the girl she had been 18 months ago, small, invisible, convinced her only value lay in service. And she thought of the woman she had become, forged in fire, tested by trials, strong enough to reject validation she had once craved because she had learned to validate herself. "I choose you," she said clearly, "not because you saved me, but because you taught me how to save myself. I choose you because when I look at you, I see not a king but a partner. I choose you because my heart, finally free to choose, chooses love." When he pressed his forehead to hers, the magic of the dragon realm responded. Fire bloomed around them, not consuming but celebrating. It was not the violent shackle of the fated bond. It was a bridge, a connection built on choice and trust. It was freedom. The dragons roared their approval, and the sound shook the palace foundations. Lysandra, former Omega of Winterclaw, was crowned Emberheart Queen. And as she stood before her new people, wings of flame unfurling from her back for the first time, she felt something she had never felt in 19 years of life. She felt like she had finally come home. 2 years passed like a dream painted in shades of gold and crimson. Lysandra learned what it meant to rule through respect rather than fear. She walked among her people and felt the weight of responsibility transform from burden into calling. The Obsidian Palace became home in ways Winterclaw never had. She established libraries for young dragons. She trained alongside Paralis in the combat yards, learning to fight because being strong felt good. And every evening, she and Veilstrom would stand on their balcony, hands joined, hearts choosing each other anew. Life was not perfect. The Dragon Council still questioned whether a former wolf could understand their ways. There were diplomatic challenges. There were nights when Lysandra awoke from nightmares of ice and rejection until Veilstrom's warmth reminded her she was safe. But she was happy, genuinely, impossibly happy. And then the raven arrived. It came on a morning when frost touched even the warm valleys, a rare phenomenon the old ones said meant change was coming. The raven was bedraggled, half-frozen, barely alive. It carried a message tube tied to its leg with ribbon Lysandra recognized immediately. Kitchen twine. The rough hemp Grenna used to tie herb bundles. Lysandra's hands shook as she removed the tube and pulled out the letter. The handwriting was shaky, ink smudged as if tears had fallen on the parchment. "My dearest girl, by the time you read this, I will be with the goddess. The sickness has taken hold, and I am too old to fight it. But I do not write to make you grieve. I write to make you proud. You survived, Lysandra. Against all odds, you survived. And from what the rumors say, you became something magnificent. I am dying, but I die happy, knowing the girl I loved like a daughter found her way to freedom. Do not mourn me. Do not waste tears on an old woman who lived a full life. But if you have any love left for the pack that failed you, I ask one thing. Come back. Not for revenge, not for vindication. Come back for the others like you, the Omegas who still scrub floors and believe they are nothing. Come back and show them what you showed me, that a spark, no matter how small, can become a wildfire if given the chance to burn." With all my love, Grenna Lysandra read the letter 3 times before the tears came. They poured down her face like a dam breaking, years of grief for the one person in Winterclaw who had seen her as human finally finding release. Veilstrom found her in their chambers, clutching the letter to her chest, whole body shaking. He didn't ask questions. He simply gathered her into his arms and held her while she cried for the woman who had been more mother than her own blood. When the tears subsided, when Lysandra could breathe again, she looked up at her husband. "I need to go back." Veilstrom's expression shuddered immediately. His scent turned to smoke and ash, fear and anger, carefully controlled. "No." Lysandra pulled back, surprised. In 2 years of marriage, Veilstrom had never forbidden her anything. "They threw you away to die," he continued, voice tight. "They rejected you, humiliated you, left you to freeze. And now you want to return?" "I'm not going to Gravi," Lysandra said, her own voice hardening. "I'm going as the Emberheart Queen. There's a difference. The difference is meaningless if you end up hurt again." Veilstrom paced to the balcony, movements sharp. I cannot lose you, Lysandra. I cannot watch you walk back into the place that nearly destroyed you. You won't lose me. I'm not the broken Omega they discarded. I am fire and wing and strength. They cannot hurt me unless I allow it. Veilstrom spun to face her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw real fear in his eyes. Emberly was strong too. She was fierce and brave and powerful, and I still lost her. Strength is not armor against fate. Understanding crashed over Lysandra. This was not about her. This was about a wound 5 centuries old. She crossed to him and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. I am not Emberly, and this is not the same. I am not going to sacrifice myself. I am going to free others the way you freed me. There is a difference between brave stupidity and purposeful courage. What if I cannot protect you there? Then I will protect myself. You taught me how, remember? You gave me the tools. You showed me my own strength. Now let me use it. They stood in silence for a long moment, morning sun painting them both in gold. Finally, Veilstrom sighed, a sound like a mountain settling. If you go, I go with you, and I bring the full might of the dragon realm. Let those wolves see exactly what they threw away. Lysandra smiled, fierce and bright. I wouldn't have it any other way. The journey to Winterclaw took 3 days. Every dragon who could fly joined them. Hundreds of them, from the smallest scouts to ancient warriors who had not left the southern realms in centuries. They flew in formation, a river of scales and wings that painted the sky in every color of fire. And at the center, riding on Veilstrom's back in his full dragon form, was Lysandra. She wore armor now. Dragon scale, forged and gifted by the palace smiths, it moved like silk but was stronger than steel. Colored deep crimson and gold, across the back was embroidered the sigil of the Emberheart Queen. A wolf wreathed in flames. As they flew north, Lysandra felt a strange pull in her chest. Not the mate bond, that had been burned away, but something else. The tug of old memories, of a place that had been home even when it had been a prison. Perilous flew beside them, crimson scales gleaming. She had insisted on coming, claiming she wanted to see the faces of the wolves, stupid enough to reject her sister-in-law. On the second night, they camped on a mountain peak. Paralis approached Lysandra by the fire. Are you nervous? Terrified, Lysandra admitted. Not of them, of myself, of what I might feel when I see him again. Paralis was quiet, staring into the flames. I was bonded once, 300 years ago. He died in battle, charging into a fight he could not win because his pride would not let him retreat. She looked at Lysandra, red eyes reflecting firelight. For a century I hated him for leaving. But eventually I realized my hatred was just love that had nowhere to go. Once I let it go, once I forgave him for being flawed and mortal and foolish, I was finally free. What if I can't forgive? Paralis smiled, sharp and knowing. Then burn them to ash and be done with it. Either way, little spark, you get to choose. And that is power they can never take from you again. They arrived at Winterclaw on the 3rd day, at noon when the sun was highest. The valley looked different than Lysandra remembered. Smaller, the pack house modest compared to the obsidian palace. The training grounds overgrown, the market square nearly empty. And over everything hung the scent of decay. Not physical rot, but spiritual decline. Lysandra's gift for reading emotions nearly overwhelmed her. She could smell desperation and fear rising like smoke from a dying fire. When the dragons descended, when hundreds of massive forms landed on surrounding cliffs and the valley floor trembled with their weight, the effect was instantaneous. Wolves poured from buildings. Warriors grabbed weapons. Mothers gathered children. The elderly stared up with terror and awe because the sun had been blotted out. The dragons circling overhead created shadow that turned midday into twilight, and the air turned hot, unnaturally hot. Dragonfire held in check but present, a promise of what could be unleashed. Veilstrom landed in the center of the great courtyard, the same courtyard where Lysandra had been rejected, where she had collapsed with mate sickness, where her entire world had shattered. He lowered himself to allow Lysandra to dismount. When her feet touched stone, she felt a jolt of recognition. Her body remembered this place, remembered pain and humiliation. But she was not that girl anymore. Lysandra stood tall, dragon-scale armor catching fractured light, amber eyes blazing with inner fire. And as she walked forward, wings of flame unfurled from her back. Not physical wings, but manifestations of her magic, beautiful and terrible, and impossible to ignore. The wolves fell back, creating a path as if she were a goddess walking among mortals. The packhouse doors burst open, and figures emerged. The first was Thornwell. Lysandra had prepared herself to see him, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. He looked like he had aged 20 years and 3.5. His dark hair was shot through with premature gray. His face was lined with exhaustion and scarred. A vicious mark ran from his left temple down across his eye, leaving it milky and blind. His armor was dented and repaired in multiple places. He was a warrior who had seen too much battle and won too few victories. Behind him came Celestia. The beautiful blonde had fared no better. Her hair was dull and hastily braided. Her dress hung on a frame grown too thin, and her eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of years of suffering. They emerged into the courtyard and stopped when they saw Lysandra. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was wind and the distant rumble of dragon wings. Then Celestia let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. You were supposed to be dead." She started forward, but Thornwell grabbed her arm. His good eye was locked on Lysandra, and his scent was chaotic storm. Shock and fear and disbelief, and buried beneath it all, a thread of something that might have been longing. Lysandra said nothing. She simply stood there, radiating heat and power, letting them see what they had thrown away. Celestia wrenched her arm free and stumbled forward. Her face was twisted with emotions Lysandra couldn't quite read. "Do you know what you did to us? Do you know what happened after you left?" "I didn't leave," Lysandra said quietly, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "I was thrown away like garbage. There is a difference." Celestia laughed, bitter and broken. "The pack fell apart. Without you and the other Omegas who fled, there was no one to do the work. I tried. The goddess knows I tried, but I was raised to be decorative, not useful. And when I failed, when warriors went hungry and sick went untended, they blamed me." Tears streamed down her face. "And then the war came. Shadow Ridge saw our weakness and attacked. We lost. We lost territory, warriors, resources. And Thornwell led our forces into battle after battle, each one more desperate than the last." She gestured at Thornwell's scarred face. "He got that defending a village that was burned anyway. And I tried to poison him. Twice. Because I hated him for not being you. Because I was trapped in a marriage to a man who looked at me every day and wished I was someone else." The confession hung in the air. Thornwell flinched but didn't deny it. "I spent every day of the last 3 years hating you," Celestia continued, voice dropping to a whisper. "Hating you because you had what I wanted. You had a real bond. I had nothing but a political arrangement and a husband who resented me." She sank to her knees, whole body shaking. "But the truth is I hated you because you were free. Even in rejection, even being thrown away, you were free, and I never was. From the day I was born, my life was decided for me." She bowed her head. "I was cruel to you because I envied you, and I am sorry. I am so sorry." Lysandra looked down at the broken woman and felt something unexpected. Pity. Not condescending pity of the powerful for the weak, but genuine compassion of someone who understood what it meant to be trapped. "I forgive you," Lysandra said softly. Celestia's head snapped up, shock written across her features. "You what?" "I forgive you, because I understand now what I couldn't then. You were a victim too, a different kind of victim, but a victim nonetheless." She looked past Celestia to where Thornwell stood. "But forgiveness does not mean I owe you anything. I came back, but not for you." Before Thornwell could speak, before the confrontation could continue, a small voice interrupted. "Wait!" Lysandra turned. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, stood at the edge of the crowd. She was tiny, thin, with tangled brown hair and eyes too large for her face. She wore the rough clothing of an Omega servant. "Are you really the Omega who became a queen?" the girl asked, voice trembling. Lysandra knelt so she was eye level with the child. "I am." "Did it hurt? Becoming strong?" Lysandra thought of the transformation, of 3 days of agony as dragonfire burned away her wolf nature, of the trials, of the long process of learning to believe in her own worth. "Yes," she said honestly, "it hurt terribly, but it was worth it, because on the other side of that pain was freedom." The girl was quiet for a moment. "I want to be like you." Lysandra felt tears prick her eyes. She reached into the pouch at her belt and pulled out a small crystal, a piece of dragon glass that glowed with inner light. "Then remember this," she said, pressing the crystal into the girl's palm. "You are not small. You are not nothing. You are a spark waiting to ignite. And when you're ready, when you've grown strong and brave, come find me. I'll be waiting." "Where?" "The Emberwatch Sanctuary in the Southern Realms. Where wolves who have been rejected, abandoned, and forgotten can come and learn their worth. I built it for you, for all of you. The girl clutched the crystal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Lysandra stood and turned back to Thornwell. Thornwell finally found his voice. It was rougher than she remembered, damaged perhaps by screaming orders over the din of battle. Lysandra, he said, in the way he spoke her name, with reverence and regret, made something twist in her chest. No, she interrupted, hand raised. You don't get to speak yet. You had your chance to speak 3.5 years ago. You chose to use those words to destroy me. Now you listen. She walked toward him, each step deliberate. The wolves in the courtyard collectively held their breath. When she was close enough to smell his scent, close enough to see tiny tremors running through his scarred hands, she stopped. Up close, she could feel the ghost of the old bond, a phantom sensation, like the ache of a limb long since amputated. Her magic had burned away the connection, but her body remembered, and she felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate, no desire for revenge or reconciliation. He was just a man, a broken, foolish man who had made terrible choices and lived with terrible consequences. Thornwell's good eyes searched her face desperately, looking for something. Recognition, anger, anything that suggested the bond still held power. But Lysandra's amber eyes were calm as still water. The bond, Thornwell whispered, and his voice cracked. I can feel it. Faint, but it's there. The goddess was right all along. You were meant to be mine. Come back, Lysandra. Save the pack. I'll make you my Luna. Lysandra laughed. It was a soft, melodic sound. Like wind chimes in summer breeze, but it cut through his desperate plea like a blade through silk. You still don't understand. You still think this is about a bond, about the goddess's plan, about fate and destiny and all the pretty lies we tell ourselves to avoid taking responsibility for our choices. She stepped closer, so close Thornwell could feel heat radiating from her skin. Let me explain something to you, Thornwell of Winterclaw. The bond you feel is a ghost, an echo of something that died the moment you rejected it. What you're feeling is not divine connection, it's regret. She reached out and touched the alpha mark on his throat, and her fingers left a faint glowing singe on his skin. He gasped but didn't pull away. You didn't reject a girl that day. You rejected the only heart that was strong enough to carry your pack's burdens. You threw me today because you were afraid that accepting me would make you look weak, afraid that loving someone unexpected would cost you your carefully constructed image of perfection. Her hand dropped away, and Thornwell swayed as if only her touch had been holding him upright. But I learned something in the years since you threw me away, Lysandra said, her voice rising so every wolf could hear. I learned that true strength is not dominating others. It is not maintaining hierarchy through cruelty. True strength is choosing to rise even when the world has given you every reason to stay down. She turned away from him, addressing the crowd. I am no longer a wolf of Winterclaw. I am Lysandra Emberheart, Queen of the Southern Dragon Realm. I am the fire that will outlast your memory. I am the spark that refused to be extinguished. She turned back to Thornwell, and you are just a man afraid of the dark. The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his scarred face crumbling. Please, he whispered. Please, Lysandra, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong about everything. I know. But your apology is not mine to accept. You should apologize to every Omega you watched suffer. To every wolf you taught that their worth was determined by their rank. To the pack you led into ruin because you valued tradition over compassion. She gestured to the dragons surrounding them. I came here with a choice for you. 3 options. Choose wisely, because I will not offer again. The silence was absolute. Option 1, Lysandra said, raising one finger. You refuse to change. You cling to your old ways, your cruel hierarchy, your treatment of Omegas as disposable tools. In that case, the dragons and I leave. We take our protection with us, and you face whatever comes next alone. Shadow Ridge will finish what they started. Within a year, Winterclaw will cease to exist. Fear rippled through the crowd, murmurs of dissent and worry. Option 2, Lysandra continued, raising a second finger. You resist. You attack us either now or later, believing you can somehow reclaim what you threw away through force. In that case, we defend ourselves. And when Dragonfire is done with this valley, there will be nothing left but ash and memory. The murmurs turned to gasps. Wolves looked at each other with dawning horror. Option 3, Lysandra said, and her voice softened. You change. You abolish Omega slavery. You establish laws that protect the weak instead of empowering the strong. You rebuild this pack on principles of equality and mutual respect. Thornwell steps down as Alpha, and new leadership is chosen. Someone who understands that true strength comes from lifting others up, not keeping them down. She paused. If you choose this path, the Dragon Realm will offer protection. We will help you rebuild. We will teach you a better way. But the price is that you must genuinely change. Not just in word, but in deed. Any Omega who suffers, any wolf who is abused because of their rank, and I will return. She let her wings of flame flare brighter. And next time, I will not be so merciful. The crowd erupted into chaos. Wolves arguing, debating, shouting. The elder council members looked furious. But the younger wolves, the ones who had seen friends die in war, looked hopeful. Thornwell stood at the center of it all, his face a mask of agony. Finally, he raised his hand, and his alpha command cut through the noise like a knife. Silence. Every wolf obeyed. He looked at Lysandra for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant when his pride finally completely broke. I choose option 3, he said, voice rough but clear. Not because I want to, but because you're right about all of it. I was afraid. I was weak. I chose image over substance, tradition over compassion, and I destroyed everything because of it. He reached up and pulled off the alpha torque from around his neck. I am not fit to lead. I never was. My father taught me that strength meant cruelty, and I was too much of a coward to question him. But I see now what real strength looks like. He looked directly at Lysandra. It looks like a woman who crawled through a blizzard with broken bones and refused to die. It looks like a queen who could destroy us with a thought but offers mercy instead. It looks like you, Lysandra. It always looked like you. He held out the torque to Celestia, who stared at it in shock. You lead. You're stronger than you know, and you understand what it means to be trapped by expectations. Build something better. Build what we should have been all along. Celestia took the torque with shaking hands. Lysandra felt something release in her chest, the last thread of connection to this place, to these wolves, to the girl she had been. Then we have an accord. She raised her hands and dragon fire poured from her palms. Not destructive flames, but healing light. It spread across the courtyard, seeping into the stone, into the earth, into the very bones of the valley. Where it touched, things changed. The weeds withered and new grass sprouted. The stores filled with grain and preserved meat. The sick wolves felt their fevers break. It was not endless wealth or infinite resources. It was a gift, a boost, enough to give them a fighting chance to rebuild. When the light faded, Lysandra lowered her hands. That is all I can give. The rest is up to you. Build something worthy. Build something that honors the wolves who suffered here. Build something that would make the goddess proud. She turned and walked back to where Veilstrom waited. As the dragons prepared to take flight, Lysandra looked one last time at the valley that had been her prison. She saw Thornwell, standing alone, watching her with his one good eye. She saw Celestia, holding the alpha torque, surrounded by wolves looking to her for leadership. She saw the elders, faces twisted with resentment. She saw the young Omega girl clutching the dragon glass crystal like a lifeline, and she felt for the first time since the rejection, complete peace. Are you ready? Veilstrom's voice rumbled through her mind. Yes, take me home. The dragons launched into the sky, wings creating wind that swept across the valley like a blessing. As they rose higher, the shadow lifted and sunlight poured over Winterclaw once more. Lysandra didn't look back. She had spent too many years looking backward, drowning in what had been done to her. Now, finally, she was looking forward. To the sanctuary she would build, to the wolves she would save, to the life she would live with a partner who chose her daily. To the future that was hers to write. 5 years later, the Emberwatch Sanctuary stood at the border between wolf and dragon territories, a testament to what could be built when two worlds chose to meet as equals rather than enemies. It was a beautiful place, buildings of stone and wood designed to feel safe without being confining. Training grounds where rejected wolves learned to fight because being strong felt good. Libraries filled with books in multiple languages. Gardens where wolves who had spent their lives working could finally learn to rest. And at the center of it all, Lysandra. She was 27 now, and motherhood had changed her in ways she never expected. The child growing in her belly, visible now at 7 months, was a miracle. Dragon magic and wolf resilience combining to create something new. Veilstrom stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on her swollen stomach, as they watched a group of new arrivals. 15 wolves, all omegas, all bearing the scars of rejection and abuse. They stood at the sanctuary gates, uncertain and afraid, not quite believing the safety offered was real. And leading them, now grown to a young woman of 15, strong and fierce and bright, was the girl from Winterclaw. She had the dragon glass crystal woven into a necklace around her throat. "We made it," the girl said, voice filled with awe. "It's real. The sanctuary is real." Lysandra smiled and walked forward to embrace her. "Welcome home." As the sun set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in shades of fire, Lysandra stood with Veilstrom's arms around her, watching the rejected wolves begin to believe they might be worth saving. She thought of the girl she had been, 19 and broken, convinced her only value lay in service to others. She thought of Grenna, whose last letter had set this all in motion. She thought of Thornwell, who had taught her what not to accept from love. And she thought of the future stretching out before her like an open road. "What are you thinking?" Veilstrom asked softly. "That I spent 19 years waiting for someone to save me, and it took losing everything to realize that the only person who could ever truly set me free was the woman I became when I refused to stay broken." She turned in his arms and kissed him, gentle and sure. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself, for choosing me every single day." "Always," Veilstrom said, pressing his forehead to hers. "I will always choose you." In the distance, the young wolves laughed as they explored their new home. The sound was bright and clear and full of hope. And Lysandra, the Omega who became a queen, the spark who refused to be extinguished, the woman who learned that her worth was not determined by anyone's acceptance, stood in the sunset and knew that she had finally, completely, come home. Not to a place, but to herself.